I'd like now to turn to the country level and ask the resident coordinator, Mr. Samarasinha, who's based in Belarus and leads the team there, the UN country team, to give us his perspective. How is all this in practice? I mean, you've heard, I mean, basically the tools are there, the willingness is there, but I mean, at least in some parts, what has this been for you on the ground when you have to manage the teams on a day-by-day basis?
Yeah, so you can take the horse to water. How do you make it drink, right? That's the question. I'm not quite sure that we think we are at the water yet, but anyway, let me first of all say thank you, Mr. Moderator, and also thank you to the Vice President of the ECOSOC for inviting me here, not just in my own capacity, but in some respects I hope to represent my fellow resident coordinators. There are only 3 of us here for these ECOSOC sessions, which in some ways I think says something, because we're all talking about the resident coordinators, and I've heard it for the last 2 days, and I wonder whether it would have been also useful to ensure that we, if not have them physically here, have them connected, or at least have their feedback before the sessions, so we will really understand what the problem is with the horse, rather than talking about the horse all the time. Well, that said, of course, this is a tough job because business operations, back office operations, not exactly quite the sexy topic that we resident coordinators like to talk about, and certainly many of you as well who are programmatic people. I remember once about 20 years ago, a resident coordinator told me, I'm a policy guy, a program guy, and he said, you know, you people over there in program and policy, you're designing a space shuttle, but those folks over in operations are running a bicycle shop. It's never going to fly unless you're ET, right? I suspect that kind of disconnect tends to be true not only of program and operations, but probably also to some extent between headquarters and the field. Now, of course, it's always easy to blame the other, and so as I go along, I also want to take a degree of responsibility on behalf of my colleagues in the country teams, and look at some very specifics. We must acknowledge that progress has been achieved in the past few years under the guidance of the UNDG. I have been well prepared by my fellow compatriot Kani with all of the things that the DG has been working on, so I appreciate that very much. We've seen the introduction of business operation strategies in some country teams, standardized common services packages, the co-location of offices. We've also seen sharing risk through pooled funding, successful integrated service centers such as the one in Brazil or Copenhagen, Cape Verde, Vietnam. And as of September 2016, 33% of the 131 UNCTs already have business operation strategies or are developing one, while another 38% plan to create these in 2017. And as I understand, the UNDG is continuing its work on some very important areas. Mutual recognition, we heard about this by UN organizations of each other's business procedures here at headquarters level. I understand the UNDG is going to be scaling up where cost effective these integrated service centers. I also understand that they will expand on the common service packages. They have 3 now, they will expand it to 7. We heard Helen Clark talk yesterday about common audits, common human resource standards, common standards for transparency, the introduction of UN Info. All of these things, of course, these tools are helpful. So yes, things are getting better, but we're still far from being the lean and not so mean organization that we need to be if you're going to help our member states fulfill their pledges to achieve the SDGs. Now, the challenge here is that everybody talks about coordination. We've heard this all the time, right? But nobody wants to be coordinated. Not at headquarters, not in the regions, and not in the field. An OMT, Operations Management Team survey in 2015 revealed that UNCTs manage services through different agencies as follows in different program countries. Administrative services, 82%. ICT and procurement, 83%. Human resources, 87%. Finance, 91%. security is the only one that did well. Maybe there's something we can learn from security. Wild idea, but why does it work? In part, I think because it's pooled resources. The financing for security, much of it, comes through one window. So we work together. Yesterday the DSG said we must be bold. Perhaps we should consider that as well as an option. When I was an investigative journalist in journalism school, my professor used to say, always follow the money. I think that the UN agencies tend to do that too. So perhaps we should consider pool funding for some of these operational services. Now, there are some things that we can continue to do here at headquarters level. I've said it already. We need stronger political commitment, clearly, from the very top leadership, from the heads of UN entities. We need buy-in not only from them, we need buy-in and accountability from the middle managers, the ones who actually make it happen within these agencies at headquarters in the regions, with the implementation of various strategic plans, not just in terms of their agency plans, but how they're actually going to work together. We need coherence and consistent messaging from you, the member states, across the governing bodies and at the country level, by host governments and donors. And of course we need dependable system-wide resourcing for change. Now, at the risk of being chastised by my colleagues in the field, I believe at the same time more can be done by UN country teams too, as evidenced by those who have piloted several of these initiatives in the different countries that I mentioned. It is possible to be more operationally efficient if we are bold and innovative. While barriers remain at headquarters, many have or are being addressed. But as one of your speakers said, country teams don't necessarily know about it. Country teams are not necessarily rewarded for being innovative. The incentives are low, the disincentives are high, especially for mid-level managers within the agencies in the field. These are people who've been working for many, many years in different agencies, and so it's more, the attitude, it's a culture, it's an issue of culture. It's more an attitude of, well, I'll believe it when I see it. And so even if you have in the country team the heads of agencies, the political will, you really have to deal with the issue of culture, the issue of capacity within the operational team. Of course, at the same time, your resident coordinators are your most committed champions for the cause, that's for sure. So let us support them as your agents of change in the field, not just in terms of lip service, not just in terms of giving them more tasks and responsibilities, but really giving them the resources, empowering them with more mutual accountability, and they will perform small miracles for you every day. Now, some concrete suggestions in conclusion. We definitely need more evidence. So it sounds good, yes, if we work together we will end up being more cohesive, we'll be more efficient. But really the evidence either exists or isn't known enough. And so we really need to look at it not just in terms of across the board, but by typology of country, by typology of country team. If we can disaggregate and say, hey, listen, this is the evidence, we can actually help to convince our partners, our donors and host governments, but also possibly convince ourselves. We definitely need better knowledge management, therefore, and dissemination across agencies. There is an issue in terms of this. Simple thing about knowledge management. We can't even access each other's intranets. I know that UNDG is working on it now, but if I can't access the UNICEF intranet, and UNICEF can't access the UNFPA intranet, then you ask yourself, these controls, these risk management measures that we have put are actually preventing us from learning from each other, learning about each other, and for sure working together. There is an ongoing process of vertical clustering by a number of agencies, the regional level, at headquarters level, especially where there are smaller field offices. So then the question is, how do you actually ensure cohesive processes at the regional level, wherever the clustering takes place. Because if the operations are in the region, then you have to work together in the regions, not necessarily in the country offices. We absolutely need to find a way to be in the same space. In Belarus, for instance, 9 agencies, 4 locations. Makes it incredibly hard to convince people to work together. But that means, host governments have to be encouraged to find common space, and in turn, agencies need to invest in capital costs with the expectation that they will recover their expenses over time. And then let me conclude about transparency and accountability. I find, generally speaking, in the different countries that I worked in, we tend to be more cost effective when there is a free media, when there's a robust civil society. I find, I have to say, I confess, I'm sorry to say, the member states tend to be less demanding when it comes to our internal operating procedures. They're certainly demanding in terms of results. But if you have to explain ourselves to the media or to NGOs what our operational costs are versus our programmatic impact, then I think that we tend to be far more disciplined about working together. So these are just a few random thoughts. As I was coming here, I saw that there was a big sign at DC1 and it says 1 UN. I was saying, isn't that fantastic if every UN building around the world had that big sign saying 1 UN? Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's the hotel you meant.
Yes, absolutely.
So I have a challenge now because I know we only have 1 hour for this really, really important subject, and I'm sure there are plenty of questions. So I'm going to take 3-4 questions, really quick questions from the floor, and then yourself, Sanaka. Last thoughts.
Okay, so let me try and address a couple of the questions that I think are fairly similar from the UK, Australia, and 1 or 2 other member states. In terms of what you can do, I mean, for sure, you got to speak with one voice in the governing bodies. If you're saying one thing to UNICEF and another thing to UNDP and something else to WFP, and you're the same and completely different in a country, then you are really not going to help us. I think you can do more to hold us accountable at the country level. I think we can do more to ensure that whatever savings we have in operations are reinvested in country, not up to headquarters or to another country, and that will actually encourage host governments, I think, to hold us more accountable for savings if they know that the money is going to come back into program. Yesterday I heard ILO talk about 12% of savings from their back office operations, but where did the money go? Did it go back into the country where it was saved, or did it go back to somewhere else? I think member states can do more to ensure that there are common premises, ideally everywhere, rather than having multiple offices. There is also an issue about different donors. I think the question was asked, what is the problem? And there are different donors who will pay for different operational services and different amounts. So, you have a challenge. If you have one person who's providing service for all agencies, does the GEF do the same thing as the EU, as the USAID? They don't. About evidence, I think the evidence, of course, has to be disseminated, but it also has to be disaggregated by country typology, by country team size, and we have to have those tools with us. Middle management, I don't really believe that our performance evaluation, our promotions, our reassignments are really linked to how well we do with respect to back office operations. So perhaps we should. And finally, let me finish by this thing about mandates and context and one size doesn't fit all. That is very true, of course. Having worked in many countries, I would agree. But that can't become the excuse. We all do human resources. We all do procurement. We all do travel. We all do finance. We all do IT. We all need security. So if we claim that the Sustainable Development Goals are indeed integrated, indivisible, then the question we have to ask ourselves is, why would we provide fragmented operational support in search of holistic, comprehensive development solutions. Makes no sense at all.
Thank you for the candor. Patrick Egli, Jan Beagle, Jeremiah Kramer, Sanaka, Samarasinha, thank you so much for your active participation. Mr. President, back to you with my apologies for the 10 minutes that I just stole from the next segment. Thank you.
No, thanks to you, Thomas, for this excellent moderation.